Good evening, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of Pilgrims on a Digital Way. My name is Matt, aka Uncle Traveling Matt, and my comrade is.
And I'm Mary Michelle. Welcome back, everyone.
And nice to see you again. This is episode 3. But what I want to do before we go on to today's question, Mary Michelle, is just have a look at a couple of comments that we had on episode 2.
Oh, yes,
Um,
please.
so episode 2, why has there been a resurgence in pilgrimage? That's what we talked about last week. I
Yeah.
had 2 comments. I think the first one's probably being a little bit flippant. It's from Neil Griffiths. It says it's the new hot yoga.
Oh my
um
goodness.
there may be some truth in that,
Well,
actually.
for some people, quite possible.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, because yoga can be seen as a spiritual discipline, and it's a way of getting fitter as well. So
Sure.
yeah, but I do wonder if he was being entirely serious there. But Adrian Rombrero has said, I guess international travel is easier. Pilgrimage or tourism, visiting historical sites is more accessible to people. Making a pilgrimage sounds more profound in the era of social media than going on a holiday or being a tourist. So I guess
Mhm.
I did talk about the fact that things were easier, and then this
Yeah,
sense of purpose, didn't I? Then he's
sure.
put,
Yes.
I wonder if every day less glamorous sacrifices slash pilgrimages have increased. I'm just postulating. I have no knowledge on this matter, so no offense meant to anyone. Just engaging with the question with a response. I mean, I would certainly no offense taken by me. I think it was quite an interesting response.
Yeah, it is interesting.
And you talked about less glamorous sacrifices,
Yeah, I'm not sure.
and more, more like smaller pilgrimages, and I think smaller pilgrimage sites are starting up again. Looking
Yes.
at it from a European perspective, obviously a lot shut down with the Reformation, and a lot
Yeah.
of the old ones and newer ones are kind of opening up again with this resurgence of interest that we talked about last week.
Yeah, Matt, I wouldn't mind popping something in there, which is that you're right about the Reformation. However, there were parts of Europe that remained deeply Catholic.
Mm,
Um, like, for example, a part of southern France that I know quite well. And I was going to say today that, we talk about these big, long, famous pilgrimages, Jerusalem, Rome, and the Camino. However, across certainly the areas that I know, there are hundreds, possibly thousands of much smaller pilgrimages that are usually a walk from the village to
mm,
an
mm.
outlying church on a certain day of the year that they've done for 500 years or longer. And those are pilgrimages also, but in a quite a different light, and very local and very regional,
Mm.
with adherents of generations of families. So that's interesting as well. And I think there's a bit of a resurgence
Yeah.
there too.
And again, of course, France didn't have the Reformation, but it did have the Revolution, which
Oh,
squashed a
before
lot
that, oh
of.
no, it didn't have the Reformation, but it had the flip. They had the Catholic and Protestant monarchs, and they had a bloodbath over
The French, yeah.
centuries
Well, the French Revolution as well. They
before
turned
the Revolution.
Notre Dame into a secular temple at one time and
Yeah,
stuff, didn't they?
yeah.
But interesting about that, and we will get on to the main question. But like on the Camino Frances, which is the most famous of the Caminos, like one of the
Hmm.
things I like is the smaller shrines on the way. So perhaps the most famous is Santo Domingo de la Calzada, which means Saint Dominic of the Way. And he was a guy. He was a locally born guy who decided to dedicate himself to God. And the way he did that was like maintaining the pilgrimage route and building a bridge over the river, and a shrine to him and a city based on him grew up around him.
Hmm.
So that's one of those smaller kind of devotions that
Right?
yeah.
Yeah, and they tend to be very, of course, we've talked about religious, spiritual, not non-religious. We're staying away actually from the specifically religious part of this conversation in the interest of breadth. And we talk keeping the conversation open with everybody. but these old traditions tend to be religious in nature. For example, there's another one. There's a Mokanigu, which is it's a mountain. It's not a mountain. It's a big-ish place. Which was sacred to the Catalans. It's near the Spanish border in southern France. It's sacred to the Catalans since the dawn of time. But at some point, it became a way to celebrate St. John the Baptist on June 25th. So everybody, like about 500 people, go up the mountain, camp out, and greet the dawn in the morning.
Wow.
So on the feast day of St. John the Baptist. So, and this is this is one of my passions, Matt, is to dig around in the local regions and history and little churches and reading the sign, finding out what they're about. So that's just a couple of anecdotes from me today. Sorry, we should.
It's okay. But you'd be very interested, like what I did yesterday. I'm feeling quite good at the moment because
yes, do tell.
Yeah, I went to a pilgrimage site in Wales yesterday with two very good friends of mine. They actually work for the church and they're missioners. But it's a site I've been going to for a number of years, and it's Saint Melangeth, who was a 7th century hermit, a female hermit, and her shrine is absolutely gorgeous. But it was destroyed in the Reformation, but they found the bits of the shrine, put it back together. It's got her relics in it, and they've also rejuvenated it as a pilgrimage center. So there is a St. Melangeth Center. There's a prayer garden. It's incredible. But what I'm going to do, I took some footage. I'm going to put a video together on that. So if you watch out on the channel, that'll appear soon.
Yeah, Matt, you mentioned that to me and I looked it up. I think it's actually it's an actual pilgrimage, isn't it? A 2-day pilgrimage, the whole walk?
Yeah.
For her? Yeah, it sounds completely beautiful. I'm excited for the video.
Okay. Shall we what's the question today?
Okay, our question for today is, what is the difference between a retreat and a pilgrimage? To which one could add what aspect of the pilgrimage is in fact a retreat? But let's start up. What's a retreat? What's a pilgrimage? What's the difference?
I don't really know, I guess. I mean, if I go back to what I talked about last week, my first pilgrimage was to Lindisfarne, Holy Island up in Northumbria. And the reason I went there is because I got in my mind I wanted to go on a retreat. I'd heard about retreats and I thought, I want a bit of time out. Retreat sounds good. But they were about 40 quid a night, which that would be about what, like 60, 70 euros now with inflation. And I didn't have that kind of money. And so I thought, oh, right, well, I'm priced out of that. I'll go on a pilgrimage instead. That'll be cheaper. So I guess the reason I'm saying this is I guess I was thinking, well, they are similar because I was looking for something to give me that space out. And I think both are time out of life. And obviously both have a spiritual / religious dimension to them. But then what's the difference? Well, I guess the thing is with a retreat, you don't really have to move.
That's the point.
Yeah, you're not going to a particular place, but then you're going to a place as in a state of mind, I think. So a friend of mine, he goes on a retreat every year, and he's actually a Buddhist, but he lives in Ireland. He was brought up Catholic, and he goes to a Catholic monastery where they don't talk. And he goes on this silent retreat every year, and he finds it very powerful, and he meditates every day anyway, and he does it, I guess, from that perspective. So there's no journeying, and I don't know. I guess have I ever been on retreats? Yes, because the couple that I went to Penant Malanga with, they used to run a retreat center in near Ireland, which is a place not far from me. And I went there, but they were like youth retreats. And like my son said, it's more like Scouts or Duke of Edinburgh Award, but with God. And, so they would do things like archery and they'd play pool with the kids. Right. The kids would go on bikes and stuff. which is not like a pilgrimage at all. That's more like a kids' activity thing, but they called it a retreat. I don't know. I've never been on a retreat per se, but I want to go on one. I do want to go on one. It's an aim of mine to go on one. So I'm going to shut up because I don't have a lot of useful things to say there. Have you been on a retreat, and what do you think?
Well, that was very interesting, Matt, especially about your friend. Because, and as you said, he goes to a Catholic monastery for his retreat. Well, if we choose a place that has a tradition from one of the religions for the retreat, then we're going to encounter that tradition when we get there. And certainly what I know about retreats and, in both the Catholic and the Anglican faiths, and I'm sure this carries across because the idea of a retreat is that we take time out from our busy routines. I happen to think this is actually of critical importance in our culture. Everybody needs to do this once a year minimum. And we'll talk about making it affordable in a minute. But if you go, for example, like your friend to the Catholic monastery, well, you could certainly expect to be spending a certain amount of time in silence. It's often a requirement in a monastery, certainly at certain times of the day, like in the evening and at night. You usually have the option of joining them in prayer, but you're not under any obligation. So you can actually go to what is considered to be a place where people are very focused on their spirituality, for rest, for peace, for reflection. For me, a retreat is very much the opportunity to take some kind of inner journey, which we can view as an inner pilgrimage in a sense, if we want to take that to a metaphorical view. And the big difference, of course, Matt, you're exactly right, is the travel. The pilgrimage implies a walk, and not just a walk, a really long walk, probably with some hardships along the way, because that seems to be part of the experience. I looked it up, and it's interesting because there's an implication. Apparently, the original word from Latin actually meant, but first it meant foreign, and then it came to mean that you travel on foot. Let's face it, when these words were around, there was only, if you didn't have any money, you didn't have a horse, well, guess what? You walked. It meant to travel on foot to a foreign place, very far away. And first it meant alien. Okay, especially, but it also does mean especially to a shrine or a sacred place. So I'll get back to the retreats in a minute, but we're assuming, we have to assume that there's a physical journey for a pilgrimage. But, I often take the metaphorical view, because if you're going on a retreat, you still have to get there. There's a journey. You have to prepare. You have to pack. You have to be creative about what you want to bring and what your expectation is that you're going to do there. Are you bringing journals and art supplies? And, obviously you're not packing like for a pilgrimage, but it's definitely a journey that is different from a vacation. So, and about the retreats, I also want to say there's a difference between, say you went to a yoga center for a retreat. Now, as you pointed out, yoga is a spiritual tradition. However, if you go to a monastery where there's a community of monks or nuns, you're going to encounter something quite different. So that's actually an important choice. What I would say about that is that if you do choose a monastery or a convent, there's a couple of things. First of all, as I said before, people have worshipped there for centuries. It's sacred by nature, and you're not obligated to do anything except just reflect quietly and make the most of the opportunity. There's a natural setting that's beautiful. About the price, which, as you say, would be a barrier for some people, none of these orders, in their spirituality, in their morality, money should never be a barrier. So it's entirely possible, you see the fee, but it's entirely possible to talk to someone and say, explain your situation and, negotiate. I know a place where I have gone regularly, where they have scholarships, so that because the community gives extra money so that somebody can come on a retreat without paying. So I think that's an important point, that I don't want us to think that a retreat is only for people who can afford it, because I think it's very important.
I think there's a couple of points I want to come back at there, because everything you
Yes,
said I
please.
agree with. The problem with the cost thing, like if I go back to me when I had less money, right? You're right. I could have gone to those places and asked, but I never thought of it. I
No,
saw a
you
price
know
and thought of it. And also, I think there's sometimes a bit of a shame thing. There's this shame in poverty that,
of course there is.
and like, and,
Well,
but like, at the Pennant Malangas place where I went, they have a little cabin for retreats and it's donation. And
exactly.
But
Yeah,
if I didn't know that, if somebody hadn't told me that, I wouldn't have known it, and I'd just think, "Oh, this is beyond my price range," kind of thing. If I was me as I was then.
yeah, that's interesting. That's
Mm,
interesting that you're pointing that out, Matt, because you see, I like that comment from you, because it's actually a very secular sort of comment, that
mm,
there's an expectation in our society that we pay our way. And if you can't pay your way, well, you're not
mm.
coming in, which is part of our, dare I say, somewhat capitalist culture.
It is.
Whereas if
It's
we're
capitalism.
talking Whereas if we're talking about a more spiritual context, where it's about the hospitality,
Mm,
and that's from that's from the time of Christ, it's from the prophets, it's from Judaism, it's from a time when we took care of people. And the hospitality is the prime directive, if you can call it that, for
yeah.
any monastic center or tradition.
Mhm,
That's it. It supersedes everything. Someone knocks on the door,
mhm.
you open the door and you invite them in.
I mean, interesting. Like I say, I haven't been on retreats, but when I was walking on my last pilgrimage, which is the way of St. Francis through Italy, one of the places where you stop is a place called Camaldoli, and it's a monastery. I think it might be Benedictine. I'm not sure, but
Very well.
I really enjoyed staying there because it was like there were two services that night, so I didn't have to look up, is there a church, is there a service on? Like, it was there. They advertised when they were on. There was this routine, and also it was Lent. So I fast, I don't eat meat during Lent. And when I went for the meal, I didn't have to tell them, because it was automatically set up for people who were fasting for Lent. And and that was nice. It was like you're in
Lovely.
this place where people are kind of in the same mindset as you are,
Yes.
and that was nice. And one final thing before I kind of wrap up my comments is,
Yeah.
you talked about a pilgrimage is about a journey and going to the foreign, going out to the alien. But the word retreat suggests the opposite direction. It suggests going
Doesn't it?
in, going back. And
Yep.
maybe that's the crucial difference. One
Yep.
is going out and
Yes.
facing those fears that are
Ah,
out there,
you
of
just
the unknown. But the other one, there's also the fears that are inside us, and they can
Yes.
sometimes be as hard to face. And
Oh,
that's
I
my comments
agree.
on it anyway.
Yeah, no, you're bingo. You just nailed two things right there, which is that, the fear of the retreat. Well, first of all, you're going to be by yourself at least some of the time. It's probably going to be very quiet. There's probably going to be an expectation. I mean, we're not talking about going drinking beer for the weekend, There's going to be an expectation that you're going to spend some time alone, reflecting in the quiet. That's quite terrifying for some people, and maybe for us all on some level. In our, we don't even like to turn off the radio, the television. If we're alone, we tend to have something talking at us. Anyway, it reminds me, actually, okay, I'm going to tell a quick story, and then the word fear. that you mentioned. I have to talk about that. So when the first time I went to this retreat, and it's a convent, because it's a Church of England, an Anglican convent, which was my choice at the time. And it was Easter. So there was a lot of silence. It was the days leading up to Easter. And actually, in that period, they actually call it the Great Silence. Yeah. So it's even more silent than usual silence. So I'm there for a couple days. And in the dining room, you usually eat your meals in silence anyway. It's most common. But of course, it's quiet. Well, I'm crying. And I'm crying, and I'm crying, and I'm crying. And after, everybody just leaves you alone because you're on a retreat. And whatever's happening is, what's happening, and it's your journey, and you're on the journey. Then finally, about on the third day, the sister pulled me over, and she took me to her room, and she said, it's okay. For some people, the silence is too much, and they can't stick it out. And I said, no, that's not the problem. And I proceeded to tell her all my problems. But there was, and then we had some great encounters after that. And it was all very helpful and wonderful. But it was interesting that she said the silence is too much for sometimes. So I just wanted to say, and that was a very specific time of year and situation that I was in. And, it's of course not always like that. But Matt, you mentioned a really valid point, which is getting out on the road and facing your fears. And yes, we have inner fears. And there's, of course, and that, inner fears are not the same journey as the outer fears of, what are you going to counter physically on the journey? So I remembered that you wrote a really interesting article about facing those fears. Do you want to just share that with everyone, and then we'll consider that for today?
I can put the link in
yes,
in the
please.
chat. But I did write.
Yeah, go over and read it, everybody. It's really good.
Yeah, I did write an article about fears, and it's called "Me and Bobby McGee and Brendan," and it's about, obviously, Me and Bobby McGee is a Janis Joplin song. And inspired by the lyric, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. And Brendan is Saint Brendan. Anyway, that's enough for them. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave some comments, whatever.
We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. This is Uncle Traveling Matt saying keep traveling, and also stay on the path.
Love that. Thanks, Matt. See you next time.